CES, the world's largest innovation event. And I'd like to welcome back Chairman Genachowski. This has become an annual tradition, and I'm very excited, and we never run out of things to say. In fact, Mr. Chairman, you've been at the Commission about 3.5 years and have achieved a phenomenal amount of success during your tenure. And I want to take this opportunity, actually, to name you something. This is not scripted, by the way. We want to call you the Spectrum Chairman, because freeing up more spectrum for wireless broadband and other services has really been a hallmark of what you've been about in so many different ways. I know on this stage a few years ago, we talked about the need for spectrum. You laid up the groundwork to get legislation. The legislation passed. It's a law now. I know we'll be talking about it. And that's been a key goal not only of your chairmanship, but frankly, for the technology industry, this has been absolutely one of the most critical issues. So here in this room, actually it's always in this room, in this chair, sitting there, we have talked about the need for spectrum, and you've been passionate about it. So I don't know, on behalf of the industry, I'll just say we appreciate your public and your private and your government service focusing on spectrum, both wired and wireless, and the dire needs. But yet here we are at the CES again, and there's more and more innovation and more products, and they do require spectrum. They require broadband, Wi-Fi. What else can we do?
Yeah. Well, Gary, the first thing I'll say is I accept this honor on behalf of my colleagues and the staff of the FCC, because the truth is, together, we really have done a lot in the last few years, but it wouldn't have been possible without just an extraordinary staff, passionate, smart, dedicated, and without all the commissioners working together. We don't agree on everything, but we do agree that on what the large challenges are facing the country and how important it is for the FCC to work together to get things done. We've gotten a lot done on a unanimous basis. We've got some things done where there's been disagreement, but we've all worked together to keep on getting good things done for the country, recognizing the importance of spectrum to our innovation future. So I'm very excited about that, and of course the legislation passed only after you put it in your book, and I don't think that's a coincidence. So I thank you for that, and the truth is, a law like incentive auctions doesn't get done without having broad support from a lot of different stakeholders, and the role that CEA played and your members' company played in educating members of Congress and us about the need and about the virtue of this particular solution, all of that was really necessary to get the legislation done. And obviously, what's ahead? I think it's a combination of things on spectrum. One is we need to implement the incentive auction legislation. We're off to a good start. We adopted a proposal a few months ago that, as many people here know, it wasn't a proposal of the sort of, hey, Congress passed this law, what do y'all think we should do? There was a lot of very specific, interesting, creative ideas in that proposal where we really want and need engagement from the community. Things like, in a data world as opposed to a voice world, should we think about band plans differently? Band plans have always been symmetrical, uplinks and downlinks equal, because in the voice world that made sense for obvious reasons. Well, in this new world, should we have non-symmetrical allocations with more for downlink than uplink? Does that make more sense in a data world or not? So that's really important. One of the things that I've challenged our staff and the community on going back 4 years is that in this new world, we need new big ideas, right? It can't be that auctions of spectrum for flexible use and unlicensed spectrum for Wi-Fi and other things are the last two big policy ideas in the spectrum world. And so incentive auctions, spectrum sharing in addition to clearing and reallocating, a next generation of unlicensed, sorting through those, moving forward on those. There's a lot to do in the mobile world, and we don't see the demand curve leveling off.
Anything on the horizon?
I do have an announcement today that I'm really pleased to make here at CES. We've talked a lot about spectrum crunch here at CES and separately, and the focus has really been on the mobile spectrum crunch and the crunch for licensed spectrum. There's also a Wi-Fi traffic jam. And anyone who's been to conferences or airports knows that it's true. And when you see what's going on the floor, and you see how much more video wants to travel over Wi-Fi networks, you realize we've got to do something about this. And so we're announcing today that we're moving to free up a substantial amount of spectrum for Wi-Fi to relieve Wi-Fi congestion and improve Wi-Fi speeds at conferences and airports and ultimately in people's homes. And this is an exciting new initiative for us, working closely with Congress on this and obviously other government agencies. But this is really important, or we're going to run into a Wi-Fi wall the way we're at risk of running into a licensed mobile wall.
So I want to know more about that, if I could ask. So where is this Wi-Fi? Wi-Fi, by the way, is the best thing since sliced bread, and this is true. And so what you're saying is unlicensed spectrum, essentially.
This is unlicensed spectrum. This is in 5 gigahertz. This is something that people have known about, and that Congress has looked at as well. It's time to move. It's time to move to do it because I think we can predict, a Wi-Fi traffic jam in the same way we can predict the mobile spectrum crunch. And we have a lot of work to do on this, particularly with federal agencies that have this spectrum. It's going to be a terrific example of spectrum sharing when we get it done. But one of the reasons we're elevating this, we're moving forward with a proceeding at the Commission next month, is because we don't want to wait until we've worked out every problem to say, oh, now we've done it. We're moving forward with it, and we're going to work out the problems as we go, because it turns out that Wi-Fi is such an integral part of our broadband ecosystem, wired and wireless, that we have to make sure we're paying sufficient attention to that as well.
Absolutely, and I'm so thrilled to hear that on so many different levels. First, as a group that produces a trade show where 2 years ago I think we asked the audience, and that was the biggest problem they had was their Wi-Fi here in Las Vegas. Seems a little bit less so this year because we've done some other things, but also a part of the show is focused on healthcare, and a lot of healthcare is not just, I know there's a lot of different ways, but they're relying on wireless broadband for telehealth.
Yeah, I was at, I don't even know what day it is anymore, but on Monday I was at the Children's Hospital in Oakland. Incredible facility that's doing amazing things using wired and wireless broadband technologies to improve healthcare for kids, that's who their patients are, and to lower costs. I mean, one of the things that's so exciting about the broadband innovation is that it really can do both. This is what we learned coming out of our healthcare pilot program, that it's not just theory that wired and wireless broadband can improve healthcare outcomes and lower costs. It's reality. In South Dakota, there's a network of 9 healthcare facilities. They saved over $1 million using broadband for remote diagnostics. In New York, the savings, the proven savings are closer to 10 million in a network of 50 people. We're expanding the program now very significantly. It's going to become a $400 million a year program. It's going to have huge payoffs in a few different ways. Improving healthcare outcomes for people all over the country, in both rural and urban areas. Oakland's an example. And it's going to lower costs, and it's going to help spur entire new industries. And this is something we all share at the FCC. I know you share it too. By leaning into these opportunities, by working every day to have the U.S. be the first country to do these things, we increase the chances that the U.S. is the country where the innovations develop, where the markets develop, and so we not only get better healthcare, lower costs, we get more jobs and more exports. So this is a great story all around, and it plays itself out in different verticals, and it's not anything the FCC can do alone, but we can do our part, and we're all committed to trying to do our part.
So I think this is all great. So what you're saying is the unlicensed spectrum is going to be freed up, and where will that be from? Or
5 gigahertz. Oh, well, the DoD and other agencies use that spectrum, As in other areas, we are convinced that the spectrum can be shared. There's so many examples of this, by the way. On one hand, the kind of spectrum sharing that we're talking about is a new concept. On the other hand, there are versions of it that we've done for a long time. When we approved mobile body area networks, M-bands, about a year ago, the Commission unanimously approved this. These are technologies that hospitals and healthcare providers are very excited about because they allow for patients to be untethered from machines when they're in ICUs or other places because it can be done wirelessly. The healthcare community is very excited about this. Well, the spectrum for that is in the same band as there are other uses. I think it's air telemetry in that band, but I could be wrong. And so these examples of making sure we have spectrum for new innovative ideas, looking at every nook and cranny of existing uses, working on the hard interference issues, and they are hard, but we've got to get what we can out of every megahertz of spectrum to seize these opportunities.
Well, I think it's absolutely terrific. I assume more information will be coming in some form from the Commission shortly, or?
Yep, and it'll be addressed at the Commission meeting next month. Next month.
Okay, well that's great. Well, you deserve the name, the Spectrum Chairman. That's for sure. That is wonderful because so much happens in the unlicensed area.
Actually, here's what my kids call me, by the way. My kids were in the office the other week, and this is what they put on the...
Mr. Poopy Boss. And Mr. Poopy Boss again. I've never said that from this stage before, and this is a CES first. Ladies and gentlemen, can we please recognize the chairman of the FCC for not only making a major announcement, but sharing what his kids have done at this... just to show what's important here. This is terrific. Absolutely amazing.
Lila and Aaron, a shout. Give it up for Lila and Aaron. Thank you very much.
That's a very, very tough act to follow, but I think, we're talking a lot here about innovation, and we've using this phrase, ninja innovation, which coincidentally is the name of a book I just released yesterday. But you have already proven to be a ninja innovator, so I applaud you. But I'd like to move to the question and answer portion, focusing on other areas, and I want to get back to spectrum to start off with. We've talked about incentive auctions. You gave an outline of where we are. How do you feel the response has been or is being? I will confess that when I heard some comments from the National Association of Broadcasters, I was a little bit alarmed. My gut was saying that they seemed to be discouraging their members from cooperating, and it really bothered me, and I was wondering what your reaction was.
Well, I think, we're seeing more and more broadcasters taking a fresh look at this idea, right? So there's a new association that's been formed, Preston Padden, a former broadcaster, that has as its members broadcasters who are very excited about the incentive auction idea. Look, I don't think it's a surprise that broadcasters who aren't interested in tendering their spectrum, and that was always expected as part of this, would rather not have any of this happen. I get that. I used to be a broadcaster. But the fact is, we need to do this for our country. It just doesn't make sense, in a market like New York, to have 28 over-the-air, full-power, 6 megahertz licenses. And, you can repeat these numbers in major urban areas around the country. It doesn't make sense. This is the best idea anyone's come up with to free up spectrum in major markets for mobile broadband. It's a market-based approach. And I think more and more what's happening is what should happen, which is that everyone's working together to make it work. There will be issues, there will be disagreements. It's why it's important for everyone to engage not only their wordsmiths, but their engineers and their business executives, because this is something that we need upfront engagement from everyone in the community who really understands both the implications of not freeing up spectrum for our innovation economy and has the best ideas on how we can do this in a way that frees up the most spectrum and that works.
So comments have not been filed, but people are making ex parte, which many of you know ex parte means you go in and you make a presentation as a party. You have to file a document. There's a whole legal process. But basically people with interests are talking to commissioners like yourself. Have you learned anything in this process that you didn't know in the beginning?
Since the review started, I'm sure I have. But I think we'll learn a lot more when the comments are filed. And I say, listen, I say the same thing to people when they come in and meet with me that I just said, to you publicly, which is, it's the engineering, it's the business analysis. That's what we need. It's not the positioning and everything else. Not that's what's happening at the meetings, but as I said, we just need full engagement from engineers and business folks to get this right for the country. And as you've said many times, and others, other members have said, this is a big deal for the country. We have to get it right. The rest of the world is watching us too, so we have to get it right for our global competitiveness as well. And by the way, on all these different areas, this, Wi-Fi, next generation unlicensed, white spaces, others, the rest of the world pays a lot of attention to the ideas that we talk about here, and they're moving step by step to act on it. In some cases, they wait and see what we do, and then they jump. In other cases, they'd be very happy to move first. It's one of the reasons why I said that broadband speeds and capacity are one of the big challenges that I think we still face as a country, even though there's been a lot of improvement over the last 4 years. We're seeing more and more commitment to thinking about speed in terms of gigabits, not megabits, in other countries. We have to have more of that mentality here. We need more gigabit test beds in the US so that we create a larger and larger platform for innovators to develop new ideas. We don't want to be behind the rest of the world on our basic speed and capacity infrastructure. Our trajectory is good. We've made a lot of progress, but we're in a global bandwidth race, and our competitors are not slowing down.
I totally agree with you in your vision. I mean, even this week here, I learned Qualcomm's keynote. Paul Jacobs gave a presentation where he's talking about basically Ultra HD at wireless through some of the chips they're offering and some of the new technologies. And I did not expect a wireless company to be talking about Ultra HD already. And then Verizon yesterday, Lowell McAdams. I mean, what Verizon is doing, what they're talking about is so extraordinary. But all of this is kind of like assume there's spectrum enough so consumer products will work reliably. And that's what you're focusing on, which is why I applaud you. I did get a question which has been not only written down for me, but I got the identical question this morning by a guy who put my mic on, and he asked about white spaces and what's happening there and when that will be resolved. And you mentioned it briefly, but could you be a little more specific?
Yeah, so a couple of things on white spaces. So one, we've moved forward a while ago at this point in adopting the rules, freeing up the spectrum, doing what we need to do on database administrators. It's moving forward. I understand that to a certain extent the incentive auction process causes people to say, how will this affect it? And I want to be really clear that once we finish incentive auctions, there will still be a broadcasting industry, there will be fewer stations, and there will be less spectrum devoted to broadcasting, but the stations that remain will still have separations, and there will still be white spaces between those stations. And in fact, my hope is that we can do things as part of this process to free up more white spaces spectrum as we go through this. Of course, the other big thing is we have an opportunity in the new band plan that we do for the spectrum that we get back in 600 megahertz to take the white spaces idea to the next level and to have a nationwide contiguous block of unlicensed spectrum of this sort that unlike white spaces, which is different frequencies in a lot of different parts of the country, which is, it's a greater degree of difficulty for innovators, this contiguous same frequency platform for innovation that we can create out of incentive auctions, I think has as much potential as the original unlicensed idea did. Remember, when the FCC did unlicensed for the first time, and 30 years ago, whenever it was, no one had any idea of Wi-Fi. No one had a clue. No one even really had an idea of garage openers or Bluetooth or baby monitors or cordless phones. These all happened because the government did its job right. It took some smart steps to create a platform for innovation, and it said to innovators, let's see what you got. That's what I want us to do as part of the spectrum that comes back. We can do that and raise a ton of money and free up a ton of spectrum for licensed use. We can do both. Congress recognized this in the statute because we're going to have guard bands. We can do this new concept in the guard bands.
Absolutely. In a similar subject, talking about broadcasting, though, getting back to them, given that we're in the single digits now in terms of the percentage of American homes or the population that rely exclusively on over-the-air broadcast, is there some kind of possibility of relaxing or even eliminating a lot of the regulation of over-the-air broadcasting? Is there some give to the broadcasters there or deal which would, because really they are the highly regulated portion of media now, and maybe they want that. Sometimes some of them have told me they do, but it seems pretty unbalanced.
Well,
not that I'm suggesting you regulate everyone else.
Yeah. Let me make 2 points. One is the incentive auction concept obviously has some complexity to it, and one of the things that sometimes requires some explanation is that what we're doing is very different and much, much bigger than simply saying to broadcasters, hey, you can use your 6 megahertz for mobile broadband. If we did that, we would not free up the kind of spectrum we need for mobile broadband because, 6 megahertz at channel 5 and 6 megahertz at channel 9 and, lots of different things in different markets. That's not what our mobile carriers need. And the magic of incentive auctions is that once we get spectrum back, we can reorganize broadcasters, shrink down the spectrum, and free up large contiguous blocks. So that's point number one. Point number two is, in the sections of my annual NAB speech that don't get as much attention as the sections that do, I've said, and I'll continue to say, that if there's anything that we can do in terms of modifying the regulatory structure to help broadcasters be multi-platform and to reach their audience wherever the audience is, we want to do it. And I've said that consistently for 4 years. I mean it. And the broadcasters have a tremendous amount of flexibility with their spectrum. It was anticipated in the original DTV law. But if there's anything more that we should do on there so that broadcasters who are incredibly important content creators in the U.S. for news and weather and traffic and entertainment, making sure that broadcasters can reach their audience wherever it is on multiple platforms in this digital world, that is part of our agenda.
So I hear you're open for discussion.
Always.
Great. Staying in the overall subject of broadband and competition, the National Broadband Plan we talked about, how are we doing? Where are we? Are you satisfied with the plan you laid out and how you're achieving your milestones?
One quick point about that goes to the point that you started with. When we started work on our broadband plan, we weren't the first country to do a broadband plan at that point. Everyone assumed, and this is what other countries had done, that a broadband plan meant a wired broadband plan. That's what it meant. And I think one of the innovative things about the broadband plan, and lots of people deserve credit for this, was we did a broadband plan that treated wired and wireless broadband as both really important. And that said, look, and a lot of the future is about wireless and mobile broadband. Let's look at that too. And so if you look at our recommendations, we have a lot of recommendations on the wired side and a lot of recommendations on the wireless side, like incentive auctions. So, some of the biggest, actually almost all of the biggest recommendations we've moved on. Incentive auctions, transforming the Universal Service Fund, creating the Connect America Fund to extend broadband deployment around the country. I think the challenges that we have to continue to focus on, and we obviously continue to have challenges as a country, more speed and capacity, continuing to be concerned about competition. Those are among some of the areas that the broadband plan identified that we have to continue to work on and not let up.
So what would you see as, like 10 years from now, a worthy goal or where we should be as a nation in terms of penetration, competition, and speed?
Well, look, 100% deployment, 100% adoption. Getting to gigabit infrastructure as quickly as we can. And I don't want to answer the 10-year thing just off the cuff, but I'd like to see us. I'd like to see us, busting through 1 gigabit in 10 years.
From your mouth to the technology god's ears. Sure. How about when you say 100% penetration? Is that competition part of that too?
Competition is, it is part of it, and it's why the FCC has been so focused, for example, on the mobile space. So like two and a half years ago, the mobile industry in the U.S. was on the doorstep of duopoly. And it's different now. Not that all the problems have been solved, they haven't by any means. But a greater number of companies are getting stronger, competing. That is really, really important for our innovation economy. And there are a lot of things to debate, in the mobile space. But I don't think it's debatable that a duopoly in mobile would be a bad thing for the U.S., especially when it's completely avoidable.
And so you'd have a duopoly in mobile and...
Or not a duopoly, but...
And also wired as well. And that's choice.
Well, we have real challenges in competition on the wired side in the U.S. So all of us would love to, figure out a way to string, fiber into every home in the country by a new provider. It's challenging, obviously. It is, I hope, that we'll see on the wireless side competitive alternatives develop for fixed broadband service to the home, fixed wireless broadband service. And, LTE is so exciting, the speeds are so fast, LTE won't be the last innovation, that it's possible that could be a new avenue for competition in the, call it fixed, not wired, because that's really what we're talking about. There's a fixed world and a mobile world. And we'll see, on one hand, and by the way, in the areas where we have the greatest competition challenges on the fixed side, we also have the most spectrum available. And so spectrum crunch becomes much less of an issue if you're talking about fixed broadband competition in rural areas. Mid-market and rural areas. So I think there's some hope there, but obviously I think it would be a mistake to just assume it's going to happen and say our competition policy is done. We have a lot of work to continue to do. We've been moving on transparency, obviously special access. It's a technical area, but very important. Moving on that. Listen, competition is the lifeblood of our free market economy. If we get competition policy right, there's much less for government to do, and I think that's a good thing. The less competition there is, the more it's unavoidable that government has to do more to, create artificially what a competitive market would look like. So focusing on competition is essential.
How does satellite fit in all that?
Well, I hope in a very positive way. The developments that we're seeing around satellite broadband are really interesting. I've participated in demos of satellite internet video conferencing, and I have to say I was impressed. Now, what it means on the ground in real-world conditions, how much capacity there is, whether satellite speeds and capacity can keep going up as the other pieces of the puzzle do. I think our job isn't to know exactly what will happen in 5 or 10 years in each of these. It's to make sure that if in any kind of people don't talk. If any lane of the information superhighway.
Wow, there's an old Al Gore.
Yeah. Well, Bill Clinton was here today, so I was thinking about this. If innovators are seeing roadblocks in any of those lanes, whether it's satellite or mobile or fixed or this or that, we should listen very carefully, remove those barriers, do what we can to free up the innovators.
Yes, you mentioned President Clinton, so I'll bring that up. He was here at the CES speaking today, and he started out and said, when I started as president, the cell phone was like 8 pounds, and it was a brick, and there was 50 websites. And he spent a good portion of his time talking about the changes and changing the world because of exactly the type of things you're talking about. Wireless, changing not only obviously the United States, but the health and wealth of people around the world.
So, and just it's worth thinking about the numbers. He probably talked about them today. I didn't see him, but since President Clinton until today, we've gone from really zero people outside in the developing world. Let's try to do the numbers this way. Very small number of people around the world with mobile broadband to now. I think the number is about 700-800 million, right? Maybe closing in on 1 billion around the world.
It's closer to 1 billion.
The sort of consensus prediction for the next 5 years is that we're going to go from 1 billion to 5 billion people around the world connected to broadband. What an amazing thing that is for the global economy, for global prosperity, and also for democracy around the world.
I personally find it breathtaking and exciting that the innovation we see here in the internet and wireless have fundamentally changed the world, and will continue to do so. You're right, when we talk 10 years out, it's kind of crazy, because one of the things certain is we will be wrong about technology. But getting back to the question.
Just one thing on this, it is worth, and I think it's really important, the global challenges to internet freedom are getting larger, not smaller.
I was going to get to internet freedom, but let's talk about that right now then, because here we just had this international event with the ITU, and I've never seen the U.S. so united on an issue. Republican, Democrat, government, small company, big company, consumer groups, everybody was on the same side, but yet we're in the minority for the rest of the world.
So I think we're seeing two dangerous trends coming together in a way that we have to be really focused on in the U.S., both inside and outside government. So one is we're seeing a censorship trend as countries around the world that don't believe in freedom recognize that open communications networks are a challenge for them. And so the awareness of the relationship between communications networks, the internet, freedom to organize and speak, and challenges to their regimes. So that's a trend that's very dangerous. We saw that in Dubai. The other trend is we're seeing, not in the U.S., but internet service providers outside the U.S., including in Europe, that want to solve their business model challenges by changing the business model of the internet. To the credit of the ISPs in the United States, they have not taken that position.
Right.
They've worked with us on open internet rules, and they're working within an open frame, and they're finding business models that work, and they're not saying we have to change the internet. But overseas, that's not the case. And so you see ISPs in Europe and other places arguing for changes, fundamental changes to the internet. You see non-democratic regimes arguing for that. These two things together make the challenge even greater than any one of them would be. And it's why it's so important that on a bipartisan basis we stay united on this, bipartisan in government, public-private, because these challenges aren't going to go away. They're just not. And so this is going to come up at international conference after international conference for a long time, and we have to keep making the argument and using our levers to preserve internet freedom globally.
So what do you think should happen? I mean, the U.S. is clearly united. I think it's just, I'm on the State Department committee that's focused on this, and I think it's just been terrific that everyone is united. But we are losing the battle with, in a sense, the rest of the world. The U.S. gets one vote, and we have some allies. But do the world's citizens have to have their Arab internet, their internet spring, or do they have to have their SOPA PIPA moment? I mean, do the consumers have to say, I want access to my internet and you can't block me, country?
I think we may see that at some point. I think that the world's citizens and consumers aren't going to just, sit by as the internet, if the internet becomes balkanized and shut down. That's not going to happen. I do think this is a fight that if we fight hard enough over time, we will win. There's obviously a risk in individual countries that those countries take themselves off the internet grid and balkanize themselves. There are obvious examples of countries that are trying to do that. That's very dangerous. But it's certainly, another level of dangerousness to break the internet, to change the basic model of the internet. And that's what was at stake in Dubai. It's what will continue to be at stake.
Right. Well, I know that everyone's working, and you've been a big part of that. And actually, some of your colleague commissioners, like Commissioner McDowell, has been ringing this bell for at least a couple of years.
No, we've been doing this together for quite some time. We were in Dubai together, in meetings together, and I think we both, share the view that the more that we work together, that signals to everyone else that everyone can work together. That this is, and it's a good thing. And there are a lot of examples of that. There were members of congressional staff from both parties who came to Dubai. Very constructive contributions, and so that has to continue. Obviously bipartisan votes in both houses of Congress. We need to keep this on the rails.
Almost unanimous votes, if I recall.
Yeah.
So that's a huge mega issue which affects basically the world in terms of access to the internet. But there's another issue that affects a population, and that is the issue of accessibility. That's been a hot topic. The landmark 21st Century Communications and Video Accountability Act of 2010 is kind of in the FCC's lap now. What do you think the impact the new FCC rules will have in that? And could you kind of summarize what the hotspots are?
So I think this is all really exciting, and this is an example. What happened in getting that law passed. Look, it's another example of something really good getting done in a gridlocked Washington.
Well, out of fairness, it wasn't gridlocked. It was a Democratic Congress and a Democratic president.
In any event, But here was the simple idea that animated the legislation as I see it, and that is one of the challenges in the accessibility world for many, many years is that what would happen is that innovators and device manufacturers would innovate and develop stuff, and then after that, issues would arise about accessibility, and then it was just a big problem for everyone, right? Because if you have to retrofit, it is expensive, someone has to pay for it, it's a problem. And the insight that I think the legislation represented is, wherever we can, let's try to address these things before rather than after. Let's try to raise these issues at the design stage rather than after, and let's be open-minded about software solutions and other ways, focus on the outcome of accessibility. And that's the approach that we've brought to implementing the law, thinking about how to get all the issues raised early, encourage more and more of the discussion to the design stage and the innovation stage without suppressing innovation in any way, but avoiding a situation where, again, there are tons and tons of products on the market that have the effect of denying access to people who are blind or hard of hearing. And listen, I saw on the floor today, I was in the Panasonic booth, and they have an accessibility section of what they're doing. It's really cool. And I think it comes out of this kind of spirit of let's think about these issues up front.
And the law does require that companies do think about them up front in the design phase. So I know you were a lawyer counseling companies. If you were a lawyer counseling any of the 3,000 companies that are showing products at this show, what would you tell them they have to do to comply with the FCC rules?
Talk to Karen Peltz-Strauss, who's done just a fabulous job at the Commission in being a tremendous advocate for people with disabilities, and also being very practical in getting things done. Now, I'm enough of a lawyer to know that I shouldn't give advice where I'm going to not get it exactly right. But one of the things we've really tried to do is make sure that we have open forums at the Commission where if people have questions, there are ways to go and answer them in advance. And the last thing we want to do is have a black box where we say, go invest hundreds of millions of dollars in something and we'll tell you afterwards whether you did it right or not. That doesn't make sense if there's any way at all to avoid it.
So if I'm in Eureka Park and I'm a startup and I have this widget and I'm trying to get funding, I have to say, someone says, wait a second, you didn't follow the FCC design and accessibility rules and make sure this is usable by people with various disabilities and test all the... What happens? How does that not impact innovation?
I think so far from everything I've heard and the feedback that I've gotten, our implementation of the statute is been consistent with common sense. And so if what we're doing, and I think the Eureka room,
Eureka Park.
The Eureka Park is such a cool idea, Gary, and I congratulate you on that. And thinking about, how can we take CES and have a part of it that's available for startups and early stage companies. It's a great idea. I'm going to go over and see it later. I think it's fantastic. And I understand that, for any startup, dealing with a lot of these issues is hard. But here's the thing. If what we're doing is causing people in Eureka Park to ask each other the question, hey, are we addressing accessibility here? And let's just think a little bit about people who are blind or hard of hearing. These are people of good intention, good faith, who are innovative, creative problem solvers. They will solve it. I think, listen, privacy is another area. It can be hard for some of these companies to think about privacy up front. And, the easy thing to do is to not spend any money up front in a startup and protecting your data and worrying about getting hacked. Well, that's not acceptable either. So encouraging the discussions, making sure that even startups think about some of these fundamental issues that can get, a lot of people in trouble, including them. I think that's a healthy thing. And having been an investor in startups, I think it's totally possible to meet goals of accessibility, for example, and privacy, without suppressing our innovation curve.
Well, we appreciate you considering both the importance of innovation and accessibility together in the same sentence. That's really important to us. Switching subjects, we've spent prior years talking a lot about the open internet and various things like that. Any thoughts on the open internet appeal, and you want to explain where we are?
So a couple of things. One is, let me remind people where we were 3 years ago, right? The broadband sector was at war with itself over basic concepts of openness and freedom. And it was a destructive, counterproductive war and I think that was suppressing innovation. And working with a lot of stakeholders, including you, we adopted an open internet framework, put it on the books, and that framework has been in place now for 2.5 years, and guess what? The arguments that putting an open internet framework on the books would kill investment in infrastructure in the US turned out to be completely wrong. In fact, the opposite has happened. Investment in innovation is up both on the edge internet side, services and apps, and on the infrastructure side. We have work this out in the US in terms of a basic framework. Obviously, a lot of issues will continue to come up. The thing that concerns me about the litigation is it's the one thing that's creating uncertainty out there. I've called on Verizon before to withdraw that litigation and work with us on making the framework work. I hope they seriously consider that because I think that's creating uncertainty. It risks unpredictability, and it risks, unraveling a healthy framework of freedom and openness that's working for our innovation economy. The rest of the world is still struggling with this, and it's one of the reasons I think we've moved ahead in the U.S. over the last few years. So, look, I'm confident that we'll win the litigation. Whether the D.C. Circuit,
I hear you
the
say
Supreme
I'm
Court.
confident, but what you're really saying is I'm past that.
Listen, what we're seeing in the U.S. is business norms and social norms around openness and internet freedom are establishing themselves, and that's a really good thing. We can avoid a lot of trouble, obviously, but I think that's a really, really good thing. We now have lots of proof points that openness and freedom are a plus for investment and innovation. And let's learn from that.
I don't disagree, but I go back to the 10-year question. So let's say we're in 10 years from now, we are in a situation where everyone has competition at wireless, competition at fixed, and I forgot where you categorize satellite. I just don't know where it falls. But you have choices. Is it still important if the internet provider changes the rules of the game and you can get out of it without penalty? Does that matter anymore?
Well, listen, competition is absolutely a holy grail in the space. We know enough about communications networks and network economics to know that it'll probably be a concern for some time, and so we have to be diligent about that. So we need to pursue both at once. We need to pursue a competition policy and strategy, and that's what we're doing. And we need to make sure that the openness and freedom of the internet that's worked so well continues.
I agree with you about the Holy Grail. Speaking of other issues you probably can't comment on. So the FCC is considering a few transactions, T-Mobile, Metro PCS, Sprint, SoftBank. Any thoughts on the transactions or the state of wireless itself?
I can't comment on the specific transactions.
But it was written for me, and I had to ask it for the person that made me ask it.
I said something about this before, not about the transactions, but about, look, over the last 4 years, the FCC has reviewed a large number of transactions, including a pretty large number of major transactions. And we've approved many. We've approved others with strong conditions and spectrum divestitures, and we've shown a willingness to block anti-competitive transactions. And you see there a recognition both that competition is absolutely vital, and that efficiency-enhancing transactions can be a good thing for our economy. And our job, looking at any specific transaction, is to consider both of those and make sure what we're doing is in the public interest, driving ultimately the American economy in the public interest.
Okay. Now, do we have an opportunity for written questions? Okay, so if you have a written question, write, well, if you have a written question, it's already written down. But if you have a question you'd like to write down, there'll be people walking around and they will collect things and give them to me. I have, I love the fact that I think you have now made an official record as the most number of consecutive interviews with a chairman. We've had every chairman here since I can remember, every year except the year that Michael Powell came here, but got very sick and didn't make the meeting and the interview, and had a lot of disappointed people. But so this is amazingly consecutive for you. But you've been there 3.5 years. What's your proudest accomplishment? Or did I already use the key words? Is it Spectrum?
I got to tell you, it's been such a privilege, and it'll continue to be a privilege to do this job. It's the most exciting sector in the economy. It brings you close to innovators every day, both innovators in the business community and social innovators, people thinking about education and healthcare and people with disabilities. It's just incredible. I'm really pleased that we focused the agency on broadband. And that inside of that, again, thanks to the great staff and my colleagues on the Commission and Congress, we've gotten some big things done. Incentive auctions and the transformation of universal service and creation of the Connect America Fund, preserving internet freedom, being smart and strong on competition, and and then a whole bunch of stuff that, wow, I mean, there's so many people at the FCC who have every right to be so proud of the things that they invent and that we do. Mobile body area networks that I talked about before, helping facilitate the commercial space industry. And this is such a wonderful accomplishment for the folks at OET at the FCC. It turns out that what we have at the FCC now is a staff that just leans into innovation and new business creation. And when companies like SpaceX said, hey, it turns out that for us to launch this new industry, we're going to need the FCC to be somewhat creative about spectrum, because you can't actually launch and operate rockets without spectrum. The staff did such a great job, just getting it done, facilitating that new industry, which is going to be a very large, important American industry. So it's such a wonderful team at the FCC, and the truth is they're the ones who deserve a round of applause and for the work they do every day.
To the FCC. So as you were talking about space and launching privately, I was wondering if your jurisdiction extended to the moon. I just couldn't figure it out.
I think it's on my schedule.
So when you started out, I guess when President Obama was elected, really there was no tablet devices, although you could argue Microsoft had one or the Kindle was out then, but really none in terms of what they could do today in terms of using spectrum to a great degree. And smartphones were just barely beginning. And here we are now with, approaching even penetration almost for both. I mean, definitely the tablet. Our projections always seem short of these tablet sales. And they use up a lot of data. What have you learned as chairman in view of this incredible change in technology? And what have you learned in the context of the FCC itself as an institution? Is it something which needs some tweaking in terms of statutory changes? Is it something you'd recommend to Congress?
Well, a few different questions. I think, first of all, the story that you tell is exactly right? So 4 years ago, 0 tablets. Today, I read in something here, astonishing number, 42% of Americans have a tablet or e-reader today. That's just incredible. And so 4 years ago, we were talking about mobile innovation, but it was mobile innovation in Korea and Japan. And we were talking about mobile infrastructure, but we were talking about how Europe had gotten ahead of us on 3G. And today, the US is leading the world in 4G. We're leading the world in mobile innovation. It's very exciting. I think one of the things it's taught me is that you'll never lose money betting on American innovation, even in Las Vegas. And I'll tell you what. Thank you. I'll tell you one story. I was talking to a reporter the other day. I won't say the publication, but one of the business publications that covers the space. And he said that he took over his beat about 4 years ago. And he said when he took over his beat, his predecessor said, "I'm so happy to be leaving. There's nothing going on in the U.S. when it comes to innovation. It's like nuclear winter here when it comes to innovation." And that's what people were sort of thinking and saying 4 years ago. And look where we are now. It's just incredible. And that's what American innovators and entrepreneurs are capable of. to your FCC question, I think the burden that puts on us is to really ask ourselves the question every day, what can we do to spur innovation? What obstacles can we remove to innovators? And how can we think about our communications connection infrastructure, our broadband infrastructure, wired and wireless, so that we have a strategic bandwidth advantage in the US, so that this is the place any innovator will want to come to develop and launch a new product, whether it's wired and wireless. And if you frame the question that way and you say to just these terrifically brilliant people at the FCC and say to people on the outside, answer that question. Let's focus on that question. I think we all increase our chances of doing the right things.
Well, actually, I have a number of questions. I'm going to ask a series of questions.
I'm just going to answer that question.
I'm going to ask you to keep your answers under a sentence or two. So why in terrestrial radio master recording performance fees not paid, but publishers who represent writers are paid? Additionally, digital broadcasters have to pay these royalties. How does that make any sense?
I'm not sure.
I know, but the question was written and I wanted to ask it.
I apologize.
Can we look forward to the removal of broadcast media censorship?
Yeah, we shouldn't have broadcast media censorship.
Okay. How do we as blind consumers help companies better design their products within their framework?
Engaging upfront through the processes we have.
Great. USF reform has created more universality than anything else. Any chance of reconsidering the regression model?
Well, it's a very, very technical question. The short answer is we're going to continue to make sure that every penny we distribute in the Connect America Fund goes to building broadband out to places and people that don't have it.
Okay. What is the current state of President Obama's broadband and it looks like goal or something to get 95% of the country online? What percentage? How are we doing?
Well, there's, on deployment, I think we're doing extremely well, but there's a lot of work to do. On adoption, we need to make a lot of progress.
Tony Romm, I can't believe you're making me ask this question.
Did he put his name down?
Yeah, well, so which is why I'm saying it. But it's
We're off the record, right?
It's so impolite. If you, nah. It was about your future plans. No, Tony's a very polite guy. He's the nicest guy in the world, but he's a reporter. Do you have a point of view on Nielsen's proposed acquisition of Arbitron? I didn't know that was happening.
No.
Okay. I'm sorry, Tony. Tony is not rude. He's the nicest guy in the world. Can you detail how the new, I think this says 56 hertz spectrum will be allocated once the commission takes it up the next month? Percentage-wise, how much new spectrum will Wi-Fi get? I'm sorry, the 5 gigahertz.
5 gigahertz?
I totally, now I understand the question. This is goes to the announcement. So percentage-wise, how much new spectrum will Wi-Fi get is really what's asking, which...
So,
I don't even know how you'd measure that.
Well, we believe we can increase the amount of 5 gigahertz spectrum for Wi-Fi by 35%. And other people will correct me on the numbers, but I believe
35% increase. That's wonderful.
Another 200 megahertz, and if that if that number's wrong, I'll stand corrected. Of additional spectrum for that will for Wi-Fi, and that will enable gigabit Wi-Fi.
Regarding the spectrum auctions, are there exceptions to low power stations at the border who have gone Mexican border who have gone through the difficult coordination process?
Well, low power will be a challenging issue as we go through this. Congress addressed low power in the statute, and we'll honor that. And but that'll be part of the proceeding.
I suspect this is not in your jurisdiction, but it's a great question. Flying drones are a hot item on the convention center floor, but they raise issues of privacy. How will the FCC look at the issues of drones since you raised the issue of privacy? You've never gotten the drone question before.
So we haven't gotten the drone privacy question.
But is there anything relevant in drones to what you do?
Well, it's similar to the commercial space industry, and you can't operate commercial drones without spectrum. And so with respect to the helping new businesses and new industries launch, the FCC will do its part to lean into making sure that we have a spectrum infrastructure that allows things that make sense from a commercial perspective. As in any other area, there are other issues that come up and they have to be resolved.
Okay. USF contributions, estimated time of arrival on report and order?
Did Rob ask that?
It's the handwriting. Let me see if it matches up.
So listen, having done the major reforms of all 4 parts of USF, so high cost fund, E-rate, Lifeline, and healthcare, the next step is taking care of the other side contributions. There are some real issues, and we'll address them.
Okay. What are your hopes for what the Dish Network will do with its spectrum, and thoughts on what would happen if Dish doesn't proceed with mobile broadband service?
You know, look, what we were focused on for a while was making sure that we remove, unnecessary barriers to using satellite spectrum for terrestrial. And we did that in connection with Dish, and we did it in a way that also unlocks the value of neighboring spectrum, the H block. So I think we really did our part to get the spectrum out there in the way that innovators in the market can put it to use. It's certainly something we're watching.
Wait, this just handed to me. That wasn't Tony Rome, it was someone signing his name. Okay, then I'll rephrase the question. What do you want to accomplish before you leave, and then what's your timetable?
Look, I think you can tell. I love the sector. I love the sector. I love the issues, and I love showing up to work every day, continuing to work on this. And I don't have any plans for that to change. And,
God, I answer the question the same way about my job too. I like that. When you have a great job, don't you want to keep it?
Yeah, and we have a great staff. We're all working on these issues every day, and I think we did a pretty good job in this conversation of going through the agenda for 2013 and beyond. It's not going to get any less interesting.
And thank you. On behalf of the innovation industry, I think you're doing a terrific job. I know I'm biased, but I don't usually say that to government officials.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you for coming here today and answering every question asked.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. It's great to do this with you.
Thank you.